All right, welcome everyone to our October Bicep community call. We have some pretty cool news today, so stay tuned. This is our team. Nothing has changed. We have one second. We have a new program manager for the dev team. So we love PC. She was introduced last week. We have our core maintainers. We introduced Daniel and Gordon last week for maintaining the Bicep modules repo. They're going to be helping us out a lot, and we really appreciate it. So what is a community call for? It is for you guys, not for us. Get updates on topics that we wouldn't cover in our own calls, and this is the time in which you can be more active in the chat and raise your hand and talk directly to our team. So like I said, raise your hands if you want to talk to us, have any questions. Otherwise, we have a questions and answers portion at the end. All right, Alex.
Okay, we have a big release this month. Thank God for Simon Whalen for getting some work done this month because the rest of us seem to have slacked off. I'm kidding. There's a lot of work that is going on that will build up to future releases, but none of that is materializing for this 0.12 release. So Simon worked on a format command for the Bicep CLI. So it's the same formatting that we'll do in VS Code. You just now have the capacity to do it as part of your CI workflows for keeping code consistent. And that's it. That's the only big thing for this, other than like little bug fixes here and there. Shifted a few things around, but this mostly looks the same for future releases. We're zeroing in on getting custom types done. So Johnny's been working on that, and I got a chance to play with it this week, and it's really cool what you'll be able to do, especially if you are authoring modules that you're sharing in a registry. This will allow the authoring experience for module consumers to be much better in terms of validation and completions and of parameters and those sorts of things. So we're really excited about that. We're also zeroing in on getting the Kubernetes provider out there. We're in our kind of like last mile of PRs there. Shenglong's finishing that up. We are getting started on these build and decompile REST APIs. So early next year, we should have portal support for export as Bicep and deploy Bicep from the portal. And then the other stuff for future releases has not really changed.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Brian, we have a really exciting deployment stacks update. Brian, do you want to take over?
Yep, I'll go ahead and share it too.
Okay, sounds good.
And let me know you can see.
Yep, we can see, or at least I can.
Yep, good. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do a quick demo at the end, although some of it's not that exciting. So I'm going to kind of give some framing and just some updates. Some of it will be repeated if you've seen this before, but there are little updates that are sprinkled throughout and just kind of how we've changed the APIs and some of the behaviors. And so if you haven't seen it, it'll be just a good way to set context. So for starters, what is a deployment stack? And just kind of a reminder that that's our way of defining a collection of resources that allow you to perform operations on those resources as a set. So you can sprinkle them throughout Azure. It doesn't matter what subscription resource group they're in. You can create that collection with a stack and then just perform whatever lifecycle operations you need to on those resources, regardless of where they are in the scope. So how does it work? The main thing is that the template defines the stack. And so the same template used for any other deployment can be Bicep, can be JSON, doesn't matter. It can be linked, it can be inline, it can be template spec, same idea. But that template defines that collection of resources for the stack. So if you want to make changes to it, you make changes to the template, and then that changes your stack definition. So that'll be key and kind of how to think of these things throughout the talk. And then you can create them imperatively or declaratively. It just means you can create them on the command line. You can create them in Portal. You can create them in SDK. You can also create them in a template. So you can have a template that creates a number of stacks. And it's a little kind of reentrant to kind of think of it that way. But if you think of a greenfield scenario where I want to lay down a bunch of things, I may have a single template that deploys a bunch of stacks. And then those stacks kind of have their own life cycle after that initial greenfield deployment. So that's kind of one way to think of it. One of the concepts that we're kind of struggling to get clear, get across has been this: what do I do with resources that are no longer part of my stack? So conceptually, it's easy to understand, but kind of surfacing that in the API has been the challenge. And so we had this update behavior property. It's now called action on unmanaged. And so think of it as, what action do you want the stack to take when those resources are no longer managed by the stack itself? And so when something is removed, and basically you can detach the resource, which means it becomes just a regular resource in Azure. It's not under quote unquote management of anything, or you can delete them, and you have the same control for resources, resource groups, management groups, anything that would be managed by the stack. You can kind of instruct what should happen with that once it's no longer managed by the stack. And then the last thing here are deny assignments. So if you think of blueprints, this was locks and blueprints. We initially started calling it locks with stacks, but we are calling it deny assignments, one, not only because that's what they actually are in the platform, but it caused some confusion with resource locks that are in Azure. So people kind of initially looked at that and said, hey, it's a resource lock. I can go and can remove it, or the owner can remove it. That doesn't really help me. So different concepts. So we're changing the name throughout the API, calling it what it really is. You'll still hear us kind of use locks here and there. We're trying to kind of remove that from the vocabulary, even though it's really easy to say. But the two options you have for that are deny delete and then deny write and delete, which essentially makes the resource read only. From a command line perspective or usage perspective, so this is the command you would see if you wanted to do a template deployment at subscription scope today. So basically you give the command a template, you give it a location, and if there's parameters, you give it parameters, but that's all that you need from the minimum required perspective to create that template deployment. So it's very simple. We wanted to kind of keep stacks just as simple in the sense that we want to make it easy for people to think about always using stacks and not using regular template deployments, because you get that extra functionality with it. So the only addition that we're going to have in that command scenario is the name, because the name of the stack is going to become important. In the case of a deployment, didn't really matter. It was more of a logging resource, kind of a transient resource you didn't care about after it was created. Whereas the stack is going to be something that you'll continue to work with as long as you care about the life cycle of those resources. So name is required. Another option you'll see is if you want to update a stack, and this also applies when you delete, but you have this command here, which is delete resources or switch to delete the resources. And that basically just says, update the stack. Here's my template. Anything that's no longer in the stack, I want that to be deleted. Detach would be the default, so you wouldn't specify a switch. Another option is creating a stack and a template deployment at separate scopes. And so there's a couple of diagrams. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But if you're creating a subscription scoped stack, you can take a resource group scoped template and deploy it to a resource group. And so you can have those exist at different scopes. So you just add the parameter for that. And then in the delete case, very simple again, what's the name of it? And then if I want to delete the resources, this particular example in delete all, I will delete resources, resource groups, management groups, anything that is managed by the stack will be deleted in that case. On to the get side, so the main thing that we think people will be interested in the get of a stack is what are the resources that are managed by the stack? And so you'll see that kind of at the bottom here. You can see some other things. You see location. You can see the resources cleanup action and the groups cleanup action. So what was specified as the operation when that stack was created or last updated. It's not what's going to happen on the next operation, but what happened when it was actually put the last time. So we'll give you a history of that. And in that particular case, if we were deleting resources and we had resources that were deleted, you would see deleted resources listed here as well. So just give you an idea of what will happen on the default experiences there. At the API level, you can think of, again, trying to keep it very simple, but you'll see some familiar things here, both the template or the template link. So again, this can be inline, it can be linked, it can be a template spec, parameters that you provide to that deployment, just as you would with a deployment. The deployment scope, and again, this is if my template is meant to be deployed at a different scope. So if I'm deploying my stack to a subscription scope, and then I want the template to go to a given resource group, I can specify that. If not, the default it will be deployed at the same scope of the stack. The action on managed property, basically the options here, you have delete and detach. Detach is the default. And then you'll have options for resources, resource groups, and management groups separately. So you could delete the resources, but leave the resource group for a case where there may be other resources in that resource group that you don't want to delete. And then deny settings, and we're actually taking the deny settings and exposing kind of the full capabilities of the deny assignment in the stack. So by default, there will be none. The two options, again, you have are deny delete and deny write and delete. And then you have the ability to exclude certain actions and principles. So if you had principles that you didn't want to have be affected by the deny assignment, you could add those and think of that as kind of the break glass scenario. And there are actions you can exclude. So any ARM operation can be excluded from the deny assignment. And in Blueprints, we actually had a default of excluding subnet join because it was a very common thing that people would do. But we also found that some people didn't want that to be excluded, and they couldn't do anything about it because we did it by default. So for stacks, we're not going to do anything by default. We're just going to expose the raw capabilities of the platform there. And then the last thing here is apply to child scopes. And so this allows you to determine whether or not that deny assignment should cascade to child resources or child scopes. So it gives you the flexibility to leave people the ability to maybe add a subnet or block the ability to add subnets, depending on the scenario. You have control over it. On the get, the response, it's going to look very similar to what you put. The additional properties are here. So you have the provisioning state, which is pretty obvious, the deployment ID. So we'll actually create a template deployment resource when you deploy a stack. So you have all the capabilities of the deployment at your disposal for that. And then the resources will be the main thing. That's what's going to be managed by the stack after that deployment. The optional things that you may or may not see, deleted resources, if there were any that were requested to be deleted and deleted. Detached, and so anything that was detached and not deleted. You could see both of those depending on what your settings for action on unmanaged are. And then there's also failed resources. So if anything didn't reach the goal state, anything didn't go as expected, then that will show up in failed resources. So you could see things that were failed but still managed. We'll talk about some scenarios for that, but this will give you kind of a full picture of what happened at that stack and what's it currently doing. So a little workflow in the day in the life of, and so this is as you go through and modify your template, what happens. And so on the initial deployment, it's pretty simple. So I have a storage account in my template. I create that stack. I use action on unmanaged of detach, or I use delete. The result of that is going to be the same because it's the first time the stack was deployed and nothing was unmanaged or removed by the stack. So that's going to look the same. Similarly, if I go through and I add something, so I have my original template, I take that and I add key vault to it. Whether I detach or delete doesn't matter because I'm only adding things in that particular case. Nothing was being removed. So if I go through a remove scenario, so I'm going to swap out storage for Cosmos, for example. If I detach in that case, that storage account then is going to go, it's still going to exist in Azure. It's just not going to be part of the stack or managed by the stack. If there are deny assignments, those deny assignments will be removed. The data will still be intact, and that's a detached scenario. If we requested that that resource be deleted, the deny assignment is removed and the storage account is deleted, the data's gone with it. So that's where you'll start to see a difference between them. Again, just going back and adding storage, and in this case, we're going to kind of do the scenario of I want to add an existing resource to my stack. So the way that I would do that is I would add it to the template, which is the source of truth for the stack, and then I deploy the template. Storage account is going to go through the same put it would as if you created it or you did another template deployment. So if it's in its goal state, it's kind of a no-op. If it's not in the goal state, then we'll make it into the goal state and then bring it under management of the stack, which means listing it in the resources, and then also kind of applying deny assignments if they're requested. In the case of the prior, I deleted it. I just created a new storage account. No difference there. So again, kind of going through, I'm going to remove storage and add web. So same thing, storage gets moved over here. It still exists in Azure. And delete, I delete it. And then the final scenario is if I delete the entire stack and I say detach the resources, those become free-floating resources in Azure again. Deny assignments are removed. They're no longer protected. In the case of delete, everything's removed from Azure. And so that's what you'll see kind of throughout the life cycle of a stack. So for scoping a stack, now this becomes important, particularly when you want to enforce the capabilities of the stack and kind of have it maintain its integrity. So I can, for example, have a resource group. I can put a stack in that resource group. I can deploy the resources. I can apply deny assignments to them, and that will work just fine. The challenge with that scenario is if I'm really trying to enforce the integrity of a deny assignment, for example, anyone that has access to that resource group may very well have access to the stack. And if they want, they can just delete the stack, detach the resources, and now they're unprotected or their deny assignment has been removed. So it's handy for kind of a dev test scenario, or I want to make sure I don't do accidents myself. I want to have easy cleanup. It's handy for those types of scenarios. But for really enforcing something like deny, you really have to think about RBAC in that resource group. So another way you can think of it is, okay, fine, I'll have a resource group. Number one, I'll put my stack there. I'll deploy my resources over to resource group 2, because I can set that deployment scope property. It'll allow me to do that. And that's a case where we're actually going to block that in the API. So we're not going to let you do that type of deployment. And the reason why we want to do that is to kind of make it easy to understand kind of the hierarchy of our RBAC, which has always been top down in Azure, and how to reason over something that's been, put a deny assignment on it, locked, and it's in another scope. So likely I go to the person that has permission at the higher scope and they can deal with it. But if things are in cross scopes, it makes it much harder to deal with. And it's really not necessary from the perspective of we have the capabilities to deploy stacks at any scope. So another scenario you can think of is, okay, fine, I can go through and deploy my stack in the resource group. I can put my web and Cosmos in there. I can put a deny assignment on it. And then I use this Bicep module. I go over here and do a nested deployment to another resource group. You can do that. We're not going to block it. But we're also not going to apply deny assignments in that case, kind of for the same reason, because we want that hierarchy to be easy and obvious for people to understand. So that's the difference that you'll see in that scenario. Kind of the recommended approach, and I would start to think a little bit more about, okay, how would we do this where we really want to kind of enforce things and maintain that integrity? So at the subscription scope, you can deploy the stack at the subscription scope, and you can deploy 2 resource groups. You can have one for web, you could have one for networking, you can have those resources in there. They can be locked as a whole, and again, that will work just fine. But when thinking about like what resources go into a stack, and so I think this is where templates and stacks and that life cycle becomes a little bit different, where the template really just laid down a bunch of resources and nothing happened after that unless I wanted to go deploy them again. With a stack, because you can do things after the fact, it really we really want to underscore thinking about the scope of a stack being resources that share the same life cycle. If they don't share the same life cycle, they shouldn't be in the same stack. And so like in this particular example, what you would end up with is probably 2 stacks, one for the app and one for VNet, because you don't update your VNet or update your networking every time you update your application. So put them into separate stacks, and now you can use that as your lifecycle boundary to perform whatever operations you need to. So in the workflow, really quickly, kind of what we go through, we deploy the stack. So there's this template deployment that we do. We actually create that. When that succeeds, we'll go and we'll update all the resources that are under management of the stack. We apply or remove deny assignments, whatever the case may be, detach or delete the resources. And when that's finished, we'll go and update the detached resources array in the response. And then at the end of that, we're in a successful state. And so that's a quick view of all the things that will happen. Kind of backing up from there, you'll have deleted resources in the case where you selected delete. So we'll add those to the deleted resources array. And again, end up with a successful state there. And when you start to have problems, so if something fails to delete, and it occasionally happens in ARM, the stack is going to continue to try to manage that resource until it reaches the goal state that you specified. So when we fail to delete a resource that we were previously managing, we will continue to manage that resource until it reaches the goal state that you set. So it'll show up in the resources array. It'll show up in the failed resources array. It will not show up in deleted because it wasn't deleted. And then we'll have a status that will indicate what happened with that resource and why is it being managed. And of course, after that, then that's going to put the stack into a failed state. Similarly, with deny assignments, it's possible for something to go wrong with deny assignments. Don't think this one is very likely. But if it does, we'll have a similar experience for it. So that resource will continue to be managed by the stack. We will say what happened to that or what failed on that. And then you'll know if there's any remedy that you need to take from there. And then the last phase here is the template deployment actually fails. So we deployed some resources, we didn't deploy others, so it's a partial deployment. We'll still update the resources array. We'll bring those resources under management. If there were any resources that were in the stack that were not updated by the current template deployment that didn't complete, we will not change the status of those resources. So we won't change the deny assignment. We won't try to remove it. because we don't know what the goal state for that resource is. So we want to continue to protect the stack. If you ever didn't want that, you can delete the stack and start over type of thing. But as long as we're in the case where we can continue to manage the resource and try to have it reach its goal state, we'll continue to do that. The last step there is apply deny assignments. We'll go to a failed state, and then that's kind of the end of that story. So what that'll look like in resources is there's a couple different states that you'll see. So this first one here is the status is managed. This resource reached its goal state, whether it's the current one or the previous one. If there are deny settings on it, we'll state what those are. A couple that you can see here are none, of course, which is the default. Not supported, which means we did not attempt to put a deny assignment on that resource by design. So if you think of that scenario where the virtual network is over here in another resource group, we're not going to put a deny assignment on it, and that's what that'll manifest as. Inapplicable means that the resource type itself does not support deny assignments. I don't know if I know what any of these are off the top. There aren't very many of them, but as we were working with our back team, it's a scenario, so we had to cover it. And then deny, write, and delete was just read only. So the second one is a case where I couldn't apply the deny assignment. So my goal state, kind of from the first resource here, was meant to be deny, delete. This actually has a deny, write, and delete. But I couldn't apply the deny assignment on it. So what you'll see here is you'll see this resource in failed resources, but you'll see its current management status. So its current deny settings are deny, write, and delete. So it will say that. And then the clue that this is different from the previous one, or it's different than what you requested. It's kind of like, okay, I need to go look at failed resources. My stack is a failed state. What does everything look like at that point? And kind of the next one down would be, this may be a goal state from a previous deployment. So this resource was already here. I didn't touch it because I didn't get a successful template deployment, and it actually has the goal state. So you'll still see that managed. The place where that might be out of place is, I know, for example, that I removed that resource from my template. I know that that resource is meant to be gone, but it's still showing up here in the same goal state as it was before. Well, your stack is in a failed state. You've got a failed resource message to go look at, and that will kind of explain why that happened. But you'll still see what the stack is trying to do with that resource. And the last two here, really straightforward. So the deny and removal failed. So you'll still see deny settings on it. And the last one is when delete failed. So there's no deny settings on this one. Because we were able to remove that. We attempted to delete it, the delete failed, and that's the state that we're in. So next steps, where are we at? So we're private preview 2 is coming up. It's probably going to be in the month of November. The features that we're adding, if you're in the current preview, or even if you wanted to get onto it now, the features we're adding is we'll have deny assignments. They weren't in the previous preview, so you'll be able to test those out. We're doing cleanup on delete of the stack. So in the previous release, you actually had to deploy an empty template to kind of see the cleanup work, and now we do cleanup when we remove the stack. We'll have management group stacks, not yet management group deployments, so you can't deploy a template from a stack to a management group yet, but you'll be able to put the stack in the management group, so you kind of have another level of separation there. And then we have a lot of CLI improvements. CLI and PowerShell, they were pretty rough. We've got a couple of devs have been doing a really good job of trying to get that through and make that a good experience. So you will notice less that you're using new preview commandments. They'll feel a lot more familiar to you as the current ones do. And then from there, we'll go into public preview. And we want this to be a quick transition, largely because we don't think there's much work that we have to do to kind of get it to the point where we can start to think about stacks instead of blueprints. So when we get that public preview, we'll officially start the blueprint deprecation clock. It's still going to be a couple of years because that's the Azure SLA. But we want to be able to tell people that they no longer need to use blueprints. They can now use template specs and stacks, and that's the future. So get people there as quickly as possible. And then you'll also see some other features light up. Portal UX will be one. What if invalidate on the stack itself, so you don't have to do that separately from the template. And then I'm sure we're going to get feedback as we go through it. So any feedback we get, we'll try to address. So that's the slides. So the next part is just kind of demo Q&A. If you got any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask or type them into chat. But what I'm going to show you here, I'll show you kind of the source for the stack. So I have two stacks that I'm going to create. One of them is this shared services stack. And basically what it has is it has a resource group for web stuff. It has a resource group for SQL. So you'll see those in the stack. And then there's a SQL module and a web module. And very simple for the demo, we just create a SQL server, add some firewall rules. And then on the website, it's just app service plan and then an admin website to try to round out a picture for it. So that's what you'll see in the first stack, which is shared services. And then the second one is the widgets app. And so basically what that'll do is it's going to go deploy a SQL database and it'll deploy a web app. And that's all that's in these here. So you'll see this database here. There's a widgets database that'll show up and then a widgets web app as well. So you'll see those things. And what I did, just so that we don't have to watch template deployments because it's not terribly exciting, is I created them ahead of time. So in my current subscription, I've got, here's all the stacks that were in the subscription. I had the shared services one, it was there initially. And then all of the resources that are managed by that stack. So you'll see the resource groups themselves. You'll see the SQL server. You'll see the server farm. And the admin website is there as well. And then I went and I created the widgets one. So just went ahead and deployed that. You can say put deny settings on it. It goes through its process, and now that's finished. And so these are the stacks that I currently have in the subscription. And so I want to test out the deny assignment. I can just go real quick here. Try to delete the resource. And the message you get back is similar to what you'll see with blueprints today, but it'll tell you with a fair bit of detail why that resource can't be deleted. So there's this thing that was created by the deployment stack. There's a lot here to digest, but it's trying to be very specific as to why this thing can't be deleted. So I might have permission to the scope, and I can normally do this, but because I have this deny assignment created by a staff, I can't do it. And so that's where that will help. So if we hop over to Portal, we'll kind of show a before and after here. So this is my shared SQL resource group. I've got the widgets database here. This is shared web. I've got the widget and the admin website there. So if I want to go ahead and remove this now, I'm going to go through and just give it the delete all flag. So this will enable the cleanup. I could have just delete the resources, like in the case of this first stack. If I wanted to keep these resource groups, then I would just say delete resources. In this case, there's nothing else in the stack, just these two resources. So I can go ahead and delete that. Prompt for confirmation, there's a little bit of, are you sure here? Because this is going to delete everything. So hopefully people will read those confirmations before they go. So what this is going to go through now is we'll go through the bulk delete API. So essentially what we do is we take all of these resources and we send it to a bulk delete API in ARM, and it does its thing. And then when it comes back, we'll kind of get that yay or nay response. And then we should see the resources disappear from here. So again, while we're waiting to do that, I don't know if anyone has questions. I'm going to drop them in the chat. That kind of rounds out the demo.
We have a few questions in the chat, but does anyone want to raise their hand and ask Brian directly? Rob? Rob, you're still muted if you're trying to talk.
Sorry, I clicked mute, nothing happened.
Okay.
You were talking about how the history of the resource state is maintained, right? And there's different collections of the different states. Is there a way to see like the chronological history? Do you maintain that kind of a history? And can you roll back to like a previous state? Like, you mentioned like you could do a deployment and something would fail. Would there be a way to roll back to the previous way so we got back to where we were?
So the chronological, the history will be in the activity log. So you can kind of go to the activity log and see what the stack had done. In terms of rollback, as we kind of went through this conversation, we initially thought we were going to go down that path. And then as we talked to more and more customers about it, it turned out that it wouldn't be as useful as we kind of initially first thought. And the reason for that is like a lot of times there is essentially what that does is it means go to a state that only Azure knows about, because my source code is actually in a different state right now. And so we kind of got into a place where the source code and the source of truth in Azure were not the same anymore. And that was something that felt a little awkward.
Yeah, so the idea is I would just redeploy the previous version of my template or something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing is a lot of stuff happens in these environments that is not captured in the template or in the pipelines. So my pipeline does things other than just deploy my template. And so those things also need to take into account the rollback. So while we could do it, we found that most customers were still going to go back to a point where like, hey, I got to go back, figure out what branch or what version of source code I need to be into, and then run that through my pipeline so that everything gets in sync.
That makes sense. Okay.
So yeah, so we took that feature out just to kind of simplify it and also not send people down the wrong path. Because if you initially thought, hey, I'm new, I'm going to go use this, we call them snapshot thing. And then you find out as you mature 6 months down the line, it's like that I got to start over again because this doesn't really do what I needed to do.
Yeah, you might think that's just going to magically fix it if I roll back, but you, like you said, there could be other things that happened in your deployment that you didn't, that weren't taken. I got it makes sense.
Exactly. Yep. See if this is updated yet. Okay, so my widgets database is gone, and then the web app's probably gone too. Yeah, so both of those are gone. So this is going to update a little bit on the stack side of things, but we're also kind of working through some performance investigations at the moment because those are gone. So this should be back by now, but kind of where we are at the moment. Okay, any other questions? Option looks like a lot of them are getting answered. Yeah, John. So I guess Marcin answered the question too. Probably going to be something similar to what you see with What If, to do the drift scenarios. The other thing that would actually be good to get people's thoughts and feedback on is, yeah, you can go and you can manage drift, but Stacks also gives you the ability to prevent drift with deny assignments. And so it'd be interesting to kind of hear more feedback about when does it make sense to think of deny assignments, deny write and delete deny assignments that would prevent drift, versus when does it make sense to actually have to, remediate type of thing. Anything else in there? When it will deny write and delete. William, will a deny write and delete prevent creating additional resources in a resource group? If you put a deny write on a resource group and you apply to child scopes in your stack, that will prevent you from creating additional resources in the resource group. And blueprints. Steve, you mentioned like what do you think would be parity for this in blueprints? If you're using blueprints, I would really like to get feedback from you guys on that. Of like, what are the must-have things that as you kind of start to poke into stacks and use stacks, what are the things that are necessary for that? Just to make sure that we haven't missed anything. So like from an API perspective, it looks like we have a lot of stuff there. I don't know that we have it all from an experience perspective. So definitely interested in feedback on that. Joaquin, the deny assignments do not stop us from changing the stack template and update it with a new deployment. Correct. So the way the deny assignments will work is that stack still has complete control over the deny assignments. So anyone who has permission to update that stack has permission to do whatever they want with the deny assignments and everything that's part of the stack. So you could, you could delete the stack and delete all the resources. You could delete the stack and detach the resources. You could update the stack with a new template and update the deny assignments. So just think of the stack as the control of all of that. Anything else in there? Does the disallow to create additional resources include sub-resources and extension resources? If you apply to child scopes and you do a deny, write, and delete, you would not be able to create extension or child resources on that resource.
Rob, do you have your hand up?
Yes. So when you do a deployment and you're putting stuff into resource groups, you had that one scenario that you were showing with those different scope scope scenarios.
Yeah.
We have like if you deploy stuff into, like, say you want a protected resource group, can you protect the resource group too, so someone can't add stuff or modify stuff that was in that resource group?
Yeah, it does mean that you have to do the deny, write, and delete. So it eventually makes everything read only. But if you
onto the resource group itself though too, right? Not just the resource inside of it. Okay.
If the resource group is managed by the stack, so the stack would have had to create that resource group, and then you can apply the deny assignment and then apply to child scopes. Somebody else had a question in here of, where'd that one go? I have to pop it up because it was related to that as I was looking for it.
Yeah, because our scenario is we have like a team that does the base infrastructure to deploy like landing zones and stuff like that, and like base products, and so those products are managed by the enterprise team. So we don't want anybody to touch that stuff. They can do whatever they want outside of that or to extend it or whatever, but we don't want them to touch anything that's in our resource groups.
Yeah. Okay. So Chris, this was the question that I was thinking of. So Chris, you had a question: can a resource group be part of two stacks? So I'll answer that two ways. Can two stacks deploy resources to a resource group? Yes, and that's probably a simple and maybe even a recommended scenario. That's kind of the scenario that I had here, where in that shared in the shared groups, there was also a widgets web app and a widgets SQL database. So you can certainly do that. The other way to think of it is, can two stacks manage the resource group? And then I'll extend that to even like, can two stacks manage a given resource? Yes, currently today they can do that. We're not going to prevent it. I would not recommend that because you will end up with those stacks likely arguing with one another. So if you think of the scenarios you have around deny assignments, where I have two stacks that are managing the same resource, they both have deny delete on them, that'll work just fine. You go delete one of the stacks and you say, hey, I want to clean up all the resources. Well, you won't be able to clean up the resources because they'll have a deny delete on them. If you extend that to deny, write, and delete, the first stack doesn't lock the resource or put the deny assignment on it, but the second stack puts deny, write, and delete. Now that first stack can no longer update the resource. So you kind of end up in these really odd scenarios if you try to do that. So again, thinking of the life cycle of the resource, that should define the boundaries of the stack and the template. And in kind of a good config as code model, you would only have one source of truth for that resource. So yes, you can technically do it. I would recommend that you kind of keep everything in one stack, because eventually you're going to run into issues with it, I think. Are there any others? I'm just kind of scrolling through it.
Yeah, everyone feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask any questions.
Yeah, if we missed anything.
Mhm.
Yeah, John, so the nested resource segments, I think you just mean child resources. I'm not terribly familiar with API deployment, but it's similar to what I did in the demo, where the shared services stack here was managing the SQL Server, and then the widgets app had its own child resource for that SQL Server. And so you can do things that way. Now you have to really think through the apply to child scopes and the deny settings you have on it, if you're to do things like that. But if you get it wrong, the platform will let you know.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what I was thinking with the child resources.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you can kind of do either way. You could, like you think of VNet subnet type of scenario, you could prevent people from adding subnets, or you could allow them to add subnets. But you could also, kind of put denies on the other subnet. So you could lock one of the child resources so it can't be changed, but still allow people to add another subnet, for example. And that's kind of why we exposed the property, just to make sure we didn't block anything. Anything else?
Looks like Kevin has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a question I had in chat there with the what if you have resources that were either pre-created or you have resources that are being managed by the deployment stack in, say, a resource group. If you run that what if, will it let you know resources being managed by the stack and resources not being managed as well? Will you get that information back? Or it'll just tell you what's in the stack?
If you run what if as part of the stack or run what if as part of another template deployment.
Or would there be another command for that? Maybe what if isn't the right question. I'm just thinking if, I'm managing things through the deployment stack, but maybe rights are still there so they can create resources and unbeknownst things are not being managed by the stack I want to manage now. Is there a way for me to find it out without having to go to the resource group?
Yeah, currently, no. We've talked about some ways to do that. So to kind of look at a resource and say, hey, is this resource belong to a stack? And it's a pretty interesting problem to go do in ARM. So we're kind of trying to digest more feedback. So as you find, kind of find scenarios for that, it would be great to talk through them and kind of see where that makes sense, if that actually helps, or if, again, like thinking of the life cycle, do we think of things a different way?
Right.
But that'll be something that certainly as, grab the private preview, start working on stuff like that and let us know how the life cycle stuff is going.
Yeah, I just imagine for like dev environments where you're deploying out, the initial dev environment, and as they're working through it and they find, oh, we need this extension, we need to add this resource, all of a sudden it's not part of the lifecycle anymore. And being able to find that information out easily would be nice without having to hunt down through the resource groups.
Yep. Yeah, Brad. So the template that I deployed, or the two that I had, so this was the shared services one, and this does create the resource groups and then does the nested deployment to those resource groups. And so that kind of laid down the whole thing. And then this one here doesn't create the resource groups, it just does deployments to those. Both of them are subscription scope templates.
Got it. Thanks.
Can Azure policy still update resources if deny assignments are applied? That is a really good question. My initial guess to that is no. And a couple ways you would.
Brian,
yeah.
I answered the question. So
okay.
deploy if not exist policies basically use managed identities. So by default, if you create a stack with like deny write or delete, they'll get blocked. But when you're creating a stack, you can specify a list of excluded principals. And if you specify the object ID of the managed identity in the list of excluded principals, then that identity will be exempt from the deny assignment and the policy will be able to function. You could also achieve that with specifying excluded actions, which basically is a list of actions that will be exempt from the deny assignment, but it's probably better just to do it with the identity in that case. But by default, it will get locked unless you allow it, unless you allow the policy to function, basically.
Yeah, so like as you create a stack, the excluded principals thing that Marcin talked about, you can add a list of object IDs here, and that would allow those principals to operate as if the deny assignment didn't exist. Thank you, Marcin. Okay, I think I got through all stuff in chat. If not, feel free to copy paste or just shout.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. All right. We have a few requested updates from the GitHub issue. Alex, I saw that you had responded to some comments, but did you want to address each of these?
Yeah, I can speak to them. By the way, before talking about the requested updates, I have switched to stacks like day to day just to see what the experience is like, and it's really good. So I'm just personally really excited to get private preview 2 out to all of you and to get rolled over to public preview. But I think I do think you guys are really going to enjoy using it, so I'm excited. The first requested update, being able to use private networking for deployment scripts, that work is in progress. Hoping it's 1 to 2 months away, but we'll see as we get closer to releasing it, but very, very close. We were blocked on ACI implementing a few underlying features for us, and now we think we'll be able to light this up. So that's soon. For number 2, the 1 megabyte deployment job size limit, I did ask for some more information for that post. This shouldn't be something that you're running into day to day. We have run into incidents here and there as we've added metadata to deployment information in our system where we've exceeded that limit. And we do monitor for it. So we hope you're not seeing that often, but please do share any repros if you have them. The 4 megabyte limit is a different story. We're having more conversations about that as well, just because we continue to get more reports more often. So we think that's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better on its own. So we are talking through strategies of how we can do that in both the short term and the long term. Any questions about the requested updates, or were there any other particular updates that people were looking for?
No, thanks for the update on the sizing. I was the one who put in that request, and Justin is on for my team too. He saw that as well. We can reproduce it like 100% of the time, and we've got our templates uploaded to the support ticket. If you want, I can like email you the ticket ID or something.
That would be perfect.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that it is something to maybe look at is like when you get a failure on that, like that you've exceeded a limit, it doesn't tell you which limit you've exceeded. It just gives you a 400. It says, yeah, you're over a limit, but there's like 4 or 5 limits you could be over, and there's zero way to tell which one it might be, which is why we had to put in a support ticket. We're like, which even limit are we hitting? Because it just comes back with a 400 job size limit, you know?
Okay, perfect. It sounds like everything is put together really nicely in the support ticket, so appreciate that first of all, and that'll be really actionable for us to figure out what's going on and what we should fix.
Another follow-up in the same line with that is the documentation for the error itself lists an option for Bicep as splitting stuff up into modules. Ask for some clarification on that, on how that could actually help if it's being compiled into a single template. Didn't get anything back. Is that like supposed to be a workaround, or is that just something that the documentation doesn't reflect accurately?
For the 1 megabyte limit, I'm genuinely not sure. I don't know, Marcin, or if anyone happens to know if nested deployments would help with that in any way.
We did we did talk about support a little bit. They probably haven't gotten back to me yet. The place where that, so it's not a guaranteed fix. The place where that will help is if you have when you have loops and things that are going to cause the template to expand once deployment starts, that you still have a size limit for that in a given deployment. So if you break it up into more deployments, then you have more chances of kind of getting under that limit. So you can certainly still hit it, even if you're using Bicep modules, but it's not going to hurt.
So it was more of a try to break it up into multiple deployments instead of just using modules will resolve the issue kind of thought process.
Modules will break it up into multiple deployments for you. So it's not that it's not that you have to do anything specifically like in the pipeline, but just the fact that using Bicep will kind of give you that advantage. And I think like most of the things that are in that doc, I don't think there's anything that's guaranteed to work.
Okay.
It was all like, okay, try this. One of these has got or like these things combined have got to work for you.
Thanks. We were just looking for some clarification, make sure we weren't doing something wrong.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I don't think we ever got to the point where like it even broke it up into deployments, because when we sent the original deployment from our main.bicep, that's when that thing got rejected. So it never even got to the point where it spun it out into multiple like sub deployments for modules.
And depending on where you're hitting the limit, it may or may not work.
Yeah, gotcha. I am interested though, like when you guys start having conversations with them about like increasing those limit or like the 800 resource limit or any of the other limits. I'm curious, like what the timeline will end up looking like that. Because like, yeah, I could definitely see bigger organizations hitting that fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think I'm curious to see what the case is, because we don't hit this one that often, to be honest with you. We don't get reports about it that often. So I'm interested in what's going on.
We currently have we did currently have a monolithic deployment. So one single bicep that pushed everything out. We have since split that up to actually a very similar to this deployment stacks kind of methodology. And we're not hitting it now, but I guess the single large deployment would be the one where we were hitting it.
Got it. Okay. That's all good context as well. We'll figure it out offline and hopefully get some satisfying changes out as a result.
All right, so we're on our questions and answers portion, but we have been answering questions already. So please, anything else not relating to updates, not relating to deployment stacks, anything you guys want to ask, please, yeah, raise your hand or put it in chat.
Can we talk more about Eric or Eric? I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your first name. About enforcing policies on stacks. I just want to make sure my understanding is that policies will still be enforced. So I can't bypass the rules of a policy. It's only the deny assignment if that's going to actually deploy something as a result of a policy violation where we need the managed identity. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. So what we're doing, this is Eric here. Eirik, but Eric is good.
Cool.
So we're rolling out like a set of policies which does include some deploy if not exist to configure certain things. And what I thought I heard was that if one of our hundreds of users decide to deploy stack and set a deny on it, then we will be enabled to actually enforce that or to do that deploy if not exist. And that is going to force us to at least rethink the way we're doing our policy enforcement today. So it kind of scares me a little bit from where I'm right now, and I might rethink it when I learn more. But as an initial thing, that a user creates a stack and therefore is able to say, no, I'm gonna avoid the higher level policies. That is a bit scary, and I don't think expecting all users to have like the object ID or the role ID of the policy assignment in their stacks is going to scale very well either. They don't normally know about how this policy assignment happens. It happens in the management group way above where they are. So I'm not comfortable with what I'm hearing, and I don't have any. I don't have any answers. Just questions and fears.
By the way, I have a question on this. When you're setting up, when you have your deploy if not exist policy set up, is there a set of managed identities that you use? Because you have to grant them access to your subscription. So I'm assuming there's a set that you have, right?
Yeah, that they live on the management group, not on the subscription.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there is a managed identity, right? So I mean, from our perspective, we have corporate, and then we have 8 worldwide regions, and each region deploys these policies. So each of these regions has a policy assignment with a managed ID, and then there are 2 more levels with management groups that come the subscriptions where the users live. So there is a managed ID. The users are not, at least today, aware of it. We might have to teach them, but we will also need to be able to say, hey, actually deploying without an exception for us is going to be illegal. So somehow we're going to need a policy that blocks us from deploying a stack, which blocks our policies. It gets convoluted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there'll be one workaround because you would have to have a deny policy on stacks if you don't have one of the managed identities that has access at that scope in the excluded principles, then you can't create a stack. That would probably prevent it, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that a policy that denies a stack which does not allow another policy is going to be working. Yeah.
Yeah, if you had a stack with a deny assignment that didn't have excluded principles, you could deny it or modify it.
No, that's
No.
interesting. We can have a modify policy on it. Okay, so this probably needs some more thinking, but when I heard it, I was like, this was a thing that was triggered me a little bit. So it needs more exploration, at least from my side, to understand it and realize how we can work with it. Yeah.
No, it's good.
That's good
It's good that it triggered you, so that we make sure we put an alias in for stacks and policies. Need to make sure we have a work item to do that.
Yeah, and honestly, it feels like we need to come up with a good recommendation that works at scale, and then probably document it as well, so everybody knows how to do it.
It may be possible. Brian mentioned modify, so you could conceptually have a policy that modifies any stack with either deny write or deny write and delete to automatically add the excluded principle, because the stack should not be will not have that deny assignment on it. Right? Brian, did that follow? Did that make sense?
Yep, that's what I was thinking. But
that's another option without having to expose users to the deny assignment, to the managed identity.
Yep, got it. Don't necessarily like it, but got it.
Yeah, it's a great scenario. So thank you for bringing our attention to it early. It's something that we'll need to think through.
And if anyone is interested in signing up for a private preview for deployment stacks, respond to Angel's comment with your GitHub alias. Simon, I don't know if you wanted to get off mute and ask us directly, or we could just answer your question in chat. Would modify add to or replace the excluded identities array? Has that been answered? Ah, no worries. Ryan, either of you answer that?
I'm looking for the question. Well, you read it again, Stephanie, so you don't have to find
Yeah,
it.
by Stanislav, or sorry, by Simon. Would modify. Okay, wait,
I think I see it. Yes,
Okay,
I think so.
Sorry.
Yeah, modify would add or replace excluded identities array. We'd have to make sure it could modify. Which
Yeah,
I think
basically we'll go back and investigate how to make that work with modify, because it sounds like modify is the best option. So we'll see what we can do to make that work the easiest way possible. But I think none of us have actually used the modify policy, so we don't fully understand the semantics yet of what's possible.
I'm gonna add something to it that I'm not sure, but it's how about when a policy arrives in retrospect, so to speak, we reconfigure policies, we move policies around. Suddenly, we have a new managed identity, and we have stacks which are already deployed with a deny except the wrong managed identity. So we reconfigure our policies. We get new managed identities, but the stacks point to the old managed identity. Yeah, there's a lot of thinking happening. I'd love to be part of it, so I'll probably reach out on the side of this one.
Yeah, another similar scenario would be the policy comes in force after the stack has been deployed. And so the stack already existed with the deny assignments, and now I go add a policy for storage accounts that I can't remediate. So that's another one to think of.
And all that said, I love the stack. So let's not throw the baby out with anything. I love what I'm seeing. It's just this one was something to think about.
Yeah, good feedback too. Yeah, one of the things with deny assignments is it's hard to think about all the things that like might go wrong with them, whether you're a user or you're Microsoft, which is why you don't see standalone deny assignments in Azure today. So this is a great conversation to have sooner rather than later.
Any other questions? We are at time, so any last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll end it here. Thank you everyone for joining. This was a great discussion. Oh, actually, we do have one more question, last minute question. Can I have a DINE that adds an accepted principal to a stack?
I think it would be more of a modify than it would be dying. Because in order for you to dine the stack or modify that in the stack, you'd have to deploy the template again. But I think the longer answer is, yeah, we get some thinking to do.
All right, thanks, Brian. And thank you everyone for showing up. And I'll see you all next month. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Ron, thanks again.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot.
everyone.